We couldn't speak English once. We learned. We learned English and German and Dutch and Indian. There were plenty of reasons why we and all this learning came to be. It was a poor village, Dernbach, the place where we started. Potato farms mostly, maybe 500 people in town, and one meat market for 9 villages. This was the 1840s. The Catholic Church in Germany was still suffering from a takeover by the state. Religious orders were unheard of. Catherine Casper, the one who began our community, was a determined woman. Her father died, so she took care of her mother and made a living by farming, not only farming her own little strip of land, but by being a hired hand. She wasn't afraid to tackle any kind of work. She made beds, swept and mopped floors, washed dishes and clothes, cooked, bandaged people's sores, and told of home remedies, and all for her village neighbors. Catherine took up nursing almost as a hobby. She found out who was ill or crippled and went to their homes to help. She even substituted at times for the neighboring doctor. Few could afford him. By 1845, she decided to devote her life to the poor and sick, and became the first volunteer of a soon-to-be group of sisters. By 1850, Catherine was joined by other women who wanted to care for the poor as well. The women needed a place to share and plan how to care for these people, so Catherine decided to build a little house, even though all she had was about $2. She trusted God. This group became the Poor Handmaids of Jesus Christ in 1851. They lived in the little house with a widow and 8 orphans. These women saw needs everywhere. Orphans needed to be educated, sick needed to be nursed, old needed to be sheltered. The little house was added on to, and soon other towns were asking for help. Camberg, Germany had the first branch little house, and at the end of 1855, 8 more little houses had been established. In some cases, they were built with the sheer ingenuity of Catherine, and in many cases with the money of wealthy laywomen who saw the needs. A little house was usually in a village. It had 4 sisters. 2 of them were visiting nurses and made the rounds of the villages. A 3rd sister taught kindergarten for 3 to 6-year-olds. That meant 40 to 60 children a day. A 4th sister looked after the house, prepared the meals, and took care of residents or pensioners. In winter, she taught sewing 5 afternoons a week for village girls. And so, that's what caught the wind. A group of women out of Dernbach is setting up little houses to help the poor and sick of small villages. You could say they were the first social workers without the title. People as far away as Caracas, Pittsburgh, and Fort Wayne got word of the Poor Handmaids. Dioceses everywhere wanted them. Fort Wayne kept asking, and finally in 1868, led by Sister Rose, 8 Poor Handmaids, fresh from Germany, arrived in Indiana, eager to work with the German immigrants. They staffed a school in nearby Hessencastle, and the next year opened St. Joseph's Hospital in Fort Wayne. By the end of that same year, Sister Paschalis and 2 sisters were tending and teaching orphans in Chicago. These simple German women asked to set up a little house in Chicago. Bishop Foley was delighted. Several rented rooms on North Sedgwick Street near St. Michael's Church became their first little house in Chicago. Its name, Our Lady Help of Christians. From this house, the sisters left to do catechetical work in the farm areas. From this house, they left to nurse the victims of the smallpox epidemics. During these crises, the city hospital authorities asked Poor Handmaids to take charge of Chicago Isolation Hospital, the Pox House, as the older sisters called it. They staffed it until it was destroyed in 1950. By their fearlessness in the face of dreaded diseases, people got to know the handmaids. Gifts and donations in appreciation helped them extend their care. Fort Wayne had its hospital by now, and Chicago as well. Poor Handmaids now moved to Wisconsin and Minnesota to establish 2 hospitals there. In 1887, Mother Secunda and her council decided to build and staff St. Elizabeth's Hospital on the northwest side of Chicago. Sister Policarpa and sisters from the first little house in Chicago took on the challenge. After these, it was St. Mary's, East St. Louis, where 4 poor handmaids replaced some Franciscan sisters of Springfield, St. Anne's, Chicago, where the sisters did farming to raise food for themselves and for the patients, St. Joseph's, Mishawaka, which had been the home of a wealthy woman, St. Mary Mercy, Gary, which was a series of 4 tar paper shacks at its beginning, and St. Catherine's, East Chicago, a place for the steelworkers, staffed by Sister Odilo and later by 4 other handmaids. These places were all begun by 1928, and most all with the help of dedicated lay persons. It's 131 years later today. We've changed a bit, we know. Our houses are getting smaller again. Our dress is no longer the same. We still work with immigrants. We still run schools and hospitals. We keep doing our work like everyday people, yes, but life today is complex. It has its own demands. Today, we train and support handicapped adults and children. We doctor low-income blacks. We check on our sick in their homes. We introduce college students to the computer world. We redo the inadequate housing of the poor elderly. We sponsor a hospital system. If God puts a job in our path, we do it. We still trust God. We try to serve as Catherine did, so that God may be better known and loved by all.